Welcome back, Humble Nation, to One Man's Humble Opinion. And today we're going to discuss episode 3 of season 8 of Game of Thrones, The Long Night. We're going to do things differently this week, change it up, whereas in the previous 2 weeks we basically went step by step through the first 2 episodes. Today is a little bit different. In this video I'm going to give my top 10 moments or characters, events in the episode, because it was a big episode and it was very involved, and to discuss everything would be quite taxing. So here are, in my opinion, the top big 10 moments in The Long Night, episode 3 of Game of Thrones season 8. We start at number 10 with Tyrion and Sansa and those in the crypts. Throughout the battle they kept switching back and forth from different vantage points, and a few times they would go down to the crypts. At first it was just Tyrion and Varys and a few others, but mostly it was the women and children, a bunch of extras. But as it became evident that the dead were going to possibly breach Winterfell, Arya ordered Sansa down to the crypts where she would be safer, and she gave her a weapon to protect herself. Well, when she gets down there, her and Tyrion are talking, and she tells Tyrion that he was the best of her husbands, of her relationships, and Tyrion says, well, that's not saying much. And towards the end of the episode, the two have a very endearing moment when Tyrion holds her hand and kisses it, and since the two of them are the only two in the crypts with weapons, they decide that they will defend the crypts. This is a really nice moment, and hopefully, these two will continue to remain on close terms, because I really like them together. I really think it's an interesting dynamic with those two characters. Number 9, and this probably could have been higher, but Melisandre returns. The Red Woman, who's been gone since late in last season, finally returns, and she returns to Winterfell. Of course, the last time we saw her in Winterfell, Jon Snow had found out what she did to the little Baratheon child, and of course banished her from the north. Said, if you ever come back to the north, you're going to be executed. Well, she comes back to the north anyway, if she, and here she is. The first thing she does is she approaches the Dothraki, who are at the front of the forces of the living, and she sets their blades on fire. It's a really neat effect, and hopefully it will add to the Dothraki charge. The undead are affected by the fire, so hopefully this will be a real advantage going forward. Melisandre then goes in and she tells Davros, don't worry about executing me, because he's pretty distraught when he sees her, of course, as close as he was to Shireen Baratheon. She said, don't worry, don't bother executing me, Sir Davros. I will be dead before the sun rises. Okay, that's interesting. So she goes into the keep for a little while. Later on, she'll come back out, and she will use a lot of magic, essentially possibly the last bit of magic she has, to light the trench around Winterfell on fire. It's a really neat effect, and it really does a good job for a moment of slowing down the dead. But they eventually figure out a way to get through it by basically enough of them burn to death, and the rest can go through by stepping over their bodies. That's what happens when you have no emotions or no feelings or no common sense. Later on, there's a key scene where Melisandre is talking with Arya, and she mentions the brown eyes, the blue eyes, and the green eyes, all of which you will shut forever. And Arya takes this, and she then leaves the room, and we don't see her for a little bit. At the end of the battle, Melisandre leaves Winterfell, and as she's leaving, she removes the amulet from around her neck and slowly falls to the ground and dies. So she fulfilled the prophecy that she told to Sir Davros that she would be dead before the sun rose. Number 8, Lyanna Giantsbane Mormont. Little Lyanna, from the moment we saw her on screen for the first time, we knew she was going to be a force to be reckoned with. She's much more brave. She's much braver for her age than you would possibly believe. And originally, the creators of the show said that she was only supposed to be a one-scene character. But I guess the actress did so well with the role and embraced it, embodied it so much that they continued to give her more and more to do. Well, this past episode was the end of the line for little Lyanna Mormont, unfortunately, but she didn't go out without a fight. As the dead are breaching Winterfell, a giant slams through the doors and proceeds to kill everyone. But before he can, Lyanna charges at the giant. The giant scoops her up, and as he's basically crushing the life out of her, she takes a shard of dragon glass and stabs him in the eye with it, killing him instantly. So, little Lyanna, you get a thumbs up from me. And may you rest peacefully. Number 7, where have all the Dothraki gone? Remember earlier when I mentioned that Melisandre had lit the Dothraki horde's blades on fire? Well, as soon as that happens, shortly after, the Dothraki do the famous Dothraki charge. Charging into the army of the undead. Charging into basically darkness. And slowly but surely, every light, every flame from the swords start to be extinguished, and they start to go out, and it gets darker and darker, until finally we see no more fire. And the next thing we know, out of the darkness come some horses without riders, and some riders without horses. And then Ser Jorah, who was leading the Dothraki army on his horse, comes out, but he looks pretty defeated. So the Dothraki now have basically all but been wiped out. This is not going to bode well for Daenerys and her conquest of King's Landing. So Dothraki, she had planned on making a major part of her force and really imposing her will upon Cersei's armies. So it's a major setback for sure. But we knew this battle was going to bring those. We knew this battle was going to shape the remaining episodes of the season, of the series, and shape the events going forward. Number 6, Dance of the Dragons. It was inevitable, right? A battle between the living and the dead. You have 2 living dragons and 1 dead one. It was inevitable that at some point they would match up against each other. Well, it comes only a little ways into the episode when Dany and Jon finally see the Lich King. Funny. The Night King on his dragon, Viserion, the resurrected dragon. They then proceed to attack him, try to kill Viserion, try to dismount the Night King. Eventually the Night King is dismounted and he falls to the ground. Jon is also then dismounted from Rhaegal, and Rhaegal flies off, essentially appearing to be somewhat wounded. So then it's just Dany and Drogon, and they sort of get lost in the fog for a little while, but eventually they show up to save Jon from a crowd of undead that are surrounding him when he's basically all by himself, and it looks like the odds are stacked against him. Very similar to what happened last season when he was all alone facing a horde of undead. Dany rescues him. Well, Drogon gets a little bit too close to the ground though, and a bunch of the Wrights jump on top of him and they start to gnaw at his armored hide. Of course, this isn't going to really do too much to Drogon, but it forces him to retreat, leaving Dany and Jon alone for the time being. Number 5, Arya's dilemma. Little Arya was possibly the best fighter and possibly one of the most skilled fighters of this entire battle. For the beginning, when she's slinging arrows of flame down at the undead before they breach the walls, and then once they're in the walls, she's fighting them off, sometimes 2 at a time. But eventually she starts to get overwhelmed. She has to retreat inside the keep, and then she winds up in the library, and she's trying to avoid detection, but eventually she gets chased by a group of about 5 or 6 of them, and it's too much for her. She's about to be overcome, but then the Hound and Beric Dardarian show up and help her to fend off the rights. But Beric pays with his life, and so we have yet another death in this episode of many. The Hound and Arya then escape and wind up in a room with Melisandre, which is when Melisandre talks to Arya about the eyes that she will close forever type of thing that we mentioned earlier. Back to Arya in a bit. Number 4, I'll call it the mass res. Okay, so the Night King has fallen off of Viserion. Jon has fallen off of Drogon. They land in a pile of corpses. The Night King then takes both of his arms and begins to raise them. And as he raises them, he not only raises the undead horde that is right there at their feet, but he also raises all of the dead in Winterfell and all of the dead in the crypts. So mass panic ensues. Here the army of the living thought that they had victory within their grasp, and all of a sudden the army of the dead has now turned into their own friends and allies. Little Lyanna Mormont, we see her start to come back. We see a few others as well who might not necessarily be recognizable, but certainly there are some undead Drakari. I don't have trouble with that word. And there are some undead, unsullied, and so forth. Jon tries to stop him. He tries to run as fast as he can to get there, but he can't. He ends up surrounded by undead. The Night King leaves, and that's when Dany and Drogon show up. But in all of the turmoil, Jon gets separated from Dany, and so Dany then winds up surrounded by an undead horde with nowhere to go, nowhere to run, until Sir Jorah shows up. Jorah shows up with Heartsbane, his Valyrian steel blade, and starts hacking the White Walkers to pieces. And he does really well, but he gets hurt in the process, very hurt. And at the end of the battle, when all the undead have been defeated, Sir Jorah, in our number 3 moment, has sacrificed himself and dies in the arms of his Khaleesi. This was a very touching moment because obviously Dany cares for Sir Jorah, even though she will never love him in the capacity that he loved her. She still cared for him very much. And so it was definitely a very sad moment. Number 2, Theon's sacrifice. We remember from last week, Theon volunteering to defend Bran at the tree in the Godswood, where the Night King would no doubt show up, according to Bran. Well, the Night King did show up. As soon as he left, the chaos that he had brought by performing the mass res, he proceeds with his lieutenants to the tree to meet Bran and kill him, defeating his number 1 mortal enemy. Well, Theon and a small group of troops that he has are not going to go down without a fight. They begin shooting flaming arrows at the undead. And Theon's very good at it, by the way. Very good. But eventually the arrows run out. It's at that moment that Bran tells Theon that he's a good man. And he thanks him. for all of his help. Theon, then knowing what is about to come, picks up a spear and runs directly into the Maw of Madness, the Night King and his men. The Night King quickly dispatches Theon, and Theon falls to the floor, dead. So it was a pretty sad episode, safe to say. We lost many people. We lost Lyanna Mormont. We lost Ser Jorah. We lost Theon. We lost Ed, the 999th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, among others. But it all culminated, it was all worth it in the end. All of their sacrifices were not in vain, because it all culminated with one of the greatest moments, nay, the greatest moment in the history of Game of Thrones. As the Night King arms himself with his sword and goes to strike Bran down, Arya comes out of nowhere, charges at the Night King, who whirls around, lifts her up by the throat, trying to strangle her. She loses the grip on her knife, only to catch it before it falls to the ground, and then thrust it right into the Night King's heart, killing him instantly. And thus all the undead die with him, including Viserion and all of those that had just gotten re-rose through the mass resurrection. So in the end, it wasn't Jon that defeated the Night King. It wasn't Dany. No, it was Arya. Little Arya Stark, who we all remember as the sweet girl from season 1 who just wanted to fit in, who just wanted to make her father and her brothers proud, who was training to fight, and who would eventually join the Faceless and become quite the assassin. I mean, think about some of the players she's taken out. You know, she took out Walder Frey. She took out basically the entire Frey house. And now she's taken down the Night King. You know, public enemy number 2. Because let's face it, folks, the Night King is gone, but Cersei, public enemy number 1, is still alive and well. Not only is she alive and well, but she's got quite a formidable set of allies. She has Euron Greyjoy, who would do anything to maintain his status. He's got a fleet of ships, one of the most powerful navies in Westeros. She has the army that her money bought her, the Golden Company, one of the finest armies, all the way over from Ethos. And with this and her own troops, who she didn't send to fight the dead, she's prepared to defend King's Landing and her throne with all that she has. So next week's episode is probably going to be more of a transitional episode. It's hard to say because they do show a scene with Targaryen ships on the water, and some troop formations and things. So it's hard to say whether or not it's going to be completely a transitional episode, or if there maybe towards the end of it might be a couple of little battles here and there. But I don't think the battle for King's Landing is going to occur until probably episode 5. And then I think in episode 6, the final episode, we'll get to see, you know, everything kind of pan out and come to a head as the series ends. But the next 3 episodes are all supposed to be, I think, about 80 minutes long. So it's going to be a great end to the season. Very exciting end to the season. Many questions still to be answered. You know, how will Cersei be dealt with? Will we see the Clegane Bowl with the Hound and the Mountain? Will Dany and Jon be able to deal with the repercussions of Jon's true identity? Will Arya continue being the hero that we all knew she could be? And who will live and who will die? Those are ultimately the questions that are still to be answered in the final 3 episodes down the stretch. And of course, the number one question, the final question, which will probably be answered in the final seconds or moments of the show: who will sit on the Iron Throne? Who will rule the 7 kingdoms? Who will win the Game of Thrones? Thanks for watching, and if you like this episode or any of the other episodes that you've seen, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and become a member of Humble Nation. And also activate the notification bell so you can be notified when new videos arrive. I promise folks that different content is coming if you're not a big Game of Thrones fan. I'm about to make a video, release a video here in a couple of days on my thoughts on Avengers Endgame, as well as later this week the 2019 NFL Draft. So have a good day. Hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Bye for now.